day, and that he did not stand up or tremble before him. He was filled with anger against Mordecai.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here today. It's truly a privilege and an honor to have the opportunity to speak before you and also lead songs today. And I know sometimes we say to ourselves, well, the preacher shouldn't be doing both, but there's been many times that this audience has preached and did Bible study when I wasn't here, when I was sick. So doing something like that is no big deal to me, and I do love to lead songs. And there's times that I go to Merrill's Ridge on Wednesday nights, and they do a Sunday service or a singing service on Wednesday night, and sometimes it's just me and 5 other people. And but we still sing and we still encourage one another, and I hope that you are not only encouraged by the music that we sing here today, but you'll be encouraged by the message we have for you here today. I know we have visitors here, and thank you so much for coming our way. You're not strangers to us, and we hope that you'll come back at any time. Today, many of us have probably had stories about Thanksgiving this past Thursday, and we talked about how our Thanksgivings are, and we all understand what the purpose of it is. I found it interesting when I did my study. It didn't originate here in the United States. It originated over in England, and we just brought it over here and perfected it. It just seems like it is a time, just like it did back then, a time to remember and be thankful for the great things that we have been given. And we have been individuals sometimes that we do forget our blessings. We forget about the great things that we have been given. That's why I told Terry I couldn't elaborate on her statement, because there's a lot of things that from what she said about prayer, and sometimes we think that we don't get what we want and therefore we are discouraged with God. We can see sometimes as a nation, we can be individuals that forget about the great things that we have and focus on the things we don't have. And sometimes when we focus on the things we don't have, we let emotions take the best of us. And this is no different than what we see in Haman. I had an opportunity to go back and do a study on Esther this past Wednesday. And as I was getting ready for not only this Wednesday night Bible study, but I was also getting ready for Thanksgiving, I went across the pages of Esther chapter 5, and we talk about Haman here. And I had Carter read verses 9 through 12, and I didn't want him to read 13. I thought, you look back here, it's like, hey, is 13 up there too? But 13 I left out because there's a purpose behind it. Because you see here that Haman talks about all the great things he has. And he talks about the one thing he doesn't have. And because this one thing he doesn't have, he becomes obsessed with it. So obsessed that it's going to be the downfall for him. And it's because he forgets about all the great other things he has. And what I want to talk about here is the things that he focuses on, the things he doesn't focus on, and how he takes this one thing he can obtain and becomes obsessed with it to a point where it's going to, that a group of people is at stake here. And then we'll find out there's a lot more than that. So if you will follow along, if you want to go in the book of Esther, you see that it says there in verse 9, this is all not worth nothing to me. Or verse 13, I'm supposed to have 13 up there. He says, yet all is worth nothing to me. Even though he had a king and queen that wanted him alone twice. Now, hindsight's 20/20. We know what happens in those 2 occasions. But here at this time, he's got this mindset that somebody really important in this world has considered him not only once, but twice. And had an opportunity not only to be there with them, but to have a meal with them. Maybe we think about sometimes a famous individual we'd like to have dinner with, or a famous individual we'd like to have lunch with, and how crazy that would be and how awesome that would be if we had this moment with this one particular individual. Haman feels that way. Not only that he is going to have the queen the king there at his side, but he's also going to have the queen there as well. I want you to keep in mind that the queen, if she wants to talk to the king, she has to get beckoned by him. Remember, she has to go out into the lot where they're all hanging out at, and he's got to try to get his attention, and he has a golden scepter, and he'll touch her if he wants to talk to her. Haman doesn't have to deal with that. I find that interesting that he has a unique relationship that no one else has. And not only he is going to have this moment with the king and queen by himself, but he's going to have it twice. He believes this is not all worth it, even though he has a listening wife and friends. How great is it that we have a spouse that will listen to all the good things and all the bad things that you want to talk about? Maybe you're frustrated and you're venting about stuff and you want to talk about it. When my wife does it to me, I think there's got to be a solution, and she gets mad at me because she goes, no, I just want to tell you what's going on. I don't need a solution. I just want you to listen. But think about how Haman tells us here about this opportunity that his wife Zeresh is willing to listen to him and listen to the things that he struggles with. And also, too, that he has friends that is by his side. They're willing to listen to the things that he has to deal with. It's very great that or let me rephrase that. It's kind of tragic that sometimes we think that when we leave this world, we only focus on ourselves and we don't really focus on the people we leave behind. We always focus on the one individual we don't have instead of focusing on all the other individuals that do love and care about us. There was a boy a couple weeks ago that took his own life down Nitro. And the coach told us when he was a football player, the reason he did it was because it was over a girl. And this fixation on this girl not being in his life, he decides to take his own life without realizing that he probably has parents that love him. Doesn't realize he has friends that care for him. Doesn't realize that he has other things that have a strong connection with him to where he has focused on just this one individual. Sometimes we are short-minded when we when we fail to realize of what we have before us. And sometimes we often forget about it. We also see too that he is rich. He talks there in verse 11 about all the riches he has. We also see it come into play when he wants to eradicate the Jews, and he takes 2/3 of his salary. If you look here, they did like a little equation how much this would be, but he was willing to take 2/3 of his salary to take care of this situation. And where Ahasuerus tells him, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it for you for free. But it shows the wealth that he has. And it also shows that the wealth, as he tells his friends and his wife about this too. He also has a great family. Psalm 127 will remind us about how much of a blessing it is to have children. And you see that through your reading of Esther, you see that he has 10 sons. He has a wife. And here he has really these great blessings before him. A listening wife, 10 sons, and they are part of his inheritance. And he reminds us, and his boasting about the things he has, that he has these children as well. We also see too that he was the only one below the king. Some of the jobs I've worked at, it seems like I have more than one boss. Actually, there's been a couple of jobs I've had multiple bosses. Lowe's, I think I had about 5 or 6, and that was just within the district. And think about how I had to answer to every one of those individuals about something I did at the job, and how frustrating that could be sometimes, that you have to answer for something you did at a job to 5 different people. This individual didn't have to answer to anybody but Ahasuerus. And think about how wonderful that is, that he has this kind of relationship with him that doesn't seem like it's a boss and employee situation. It is really kind of like a friend-to-friend situation. But we'll see how drastic that changed here shortly afterwards. Look, too, that when he says that this one thing that he does not want is, I don't want to see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Of all the great things he has, the one thing that bothers him and drives him nuts, and we'll see there in chapter 3, you see that this draws him to the point that he's furious. If you look here at Esther chapter 3, verse 5, it says, when Haman saw Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury. Is that all it takes? Is that all it takes to make you mad? Think about how sometimes we have these things put out to us, just small things. Jesus reminds us of the parable of the sower, how he uses a small example of a mustard seed to show us what our faith is like, and how that word of God can be sown as well. And you see there in Mark chapter 4, verses 28 through 29, it says, the earth produces by itself first the blade, then the ear, then full grain in the ear. But when the grain is ripe, at once he puts it in the sickle because the harvest has come. And it went from something small and insignificant to something big. This individual is not willing to bow down to him. He's made a big deal out of this, even though it's small and insignificant. Maybe we have dealt with that too. At my office, I scoot around in an office chair, and sometimes when I touch the metal file cabinet, I get shocked. And I thought about a movie one time where the guy got so annoyed that every time he touched the doorknob, like I do with that cabinet, he gets shocked and it just frustrates him to no end. Well, I'm not going to stop opening up the file cabinet. I'm not going to stop working there because the one problem I have, I get shocked by it. Maybe someone will give me some advice afterwards. Well, you know what you can do to stop that, Jay. But the thing is, we should not let things that small and insignificant bother us. But we see so many times in life, we see so many times in Scripture, we see so many times in our own experiences where somebody takes something small and insignificant and makes a big deal out of it. Why do we let those small things eat at us? It's small. It's not going to take your life. It's not going to change your. It's not going to destroy you. It's not going to take away your family and your kids. It's not going to take anything that has really any value. I mean, just a little bit of peace of mind. But we see that here's where he's at. He's at this point where this small thing has made him furious. And sometimes we do just the same thing. We make small things make us furious. And now he's going to take action. And he's not only going to take action on Mordecai, the one guy that's not willing to bow to him or show reverence to him, he's going to take it out on everybody. If you look there in verse 6, he says he's disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. And brethren, this is not some small empire that they have here. It is huge. And it covers the Middle East. I should have put a map up here just to give you an idea of what the Mede-Persian Empire was all about. Because it was a huge one. But there's all kinds of people that live throughout this empire. And there's a majority of them that are Jewish. And he's going to take them out for what one guy did. Many times we think that in order to get our point across, we got to do it in a very large and big and boisterous way to get our point across. But the thing is, when he does this, he doesn't realize the ramifications that's going to happen. I do believe he doesn't know Esther is Jewish. And he only finds out when she calls him out in Esther chapter 6. But we do the same thing. It's not only when we have something go not in our way, but we lead ourselves to sin, and we say to ourselves that it doesn't impact anybody but me and the individual I do it to. And that's so wrong to keep that assumption. It's the same way hypocrisy works too. We don't realize who will affect. We just assume it will only be me. And look how sometimes the proverb writer reminds us what an individual that is filled with fury can do and what he's compared to. He says, a fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back. I put verse 12 in there because if a ruler listens to falsehood, all of his officials will be wicked. And this is a falsehood. And we see that Haman is wicked. And what Ahasuerus will do, instead of when this decree has been let out, he does something even dumber when it comes to trying to fix it. But it all comes from this idea that we listen to what our officials say. And here is how trusting he was with Haman. He gave him his signet ring that gives him approval to do whatever he wants. If he writes something down, all he has to do is stamp that with his ring, and that's from the king. And he gives them that full power to do so. And it comes to a point that he is going to give this decree, and while they're in the midst of eating in Esther chapter 3, everybody's in confusion. Why is this going on? It's affecting everybody, and everybody doesn't know why, that there is going to be a day that comes and they're going to lose their lives over it. They don't know what they did wrong. It's because of one guy. And instead of dealing with just one guy, he says, no, I'm going to deal with everybody. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a second. One of the things we see too is in two passages, he takes every opportunity and every power that he has to make Mordecai pay. When you look at verse 9, he's going to take that 10,000 talents of silver, that 2/3 of his pay, he's going to put it in charge of someone to take care of this business that he has issue with. He is willing to give that much money to resolve this problem that he has with this one person. And then when you look at verse 13, when he gives the okay to do so, he decides to do it on a particular day. He goes there, he goes, letters were sent by the couriers to all the king's provinces with instruction to destroy, to kill, to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. If you study under the Jewish history, there's a specific reason why he would do it on this day. It's when Moses dies. I don't know how the Jewish pronunciation as it goes, but this is supposed to be the day that Moses leaves this earth. And he celebrated with mourning. This guy is going to make sure that they not only pay, but they're already going to hit rock bottom before this day even comes. And they're going to do it on a day was reserved for mourning. He decides to do it on this holiday. And he decides that, from my understanding, from the time this proclamation is done to the day that it's supposed to be taken in action is a little less than a year. Not only that he is going to execute this justice on them, but he's going to make them have time to think about it too. There's a lot of interesting things that go on here, and it just shows how immature Haman is. It also shows that there is no ends to his frustration and his fury. And he's willing to go beyond reason. He's willing to go beyond logic. He's willing to go beyond beyond the things that he is supposed to be as an official of the king's palace, to make sure one guy who was not willing to bow paid for it. So, some things I find interesting is how, just like him, we forget about all the things that we have, and we focus on this one thing that we don't have. And it just seems like we try to add to our wrath. If you look here at the beginning of Esther chapter 3, he's an Agagite. And maybe that sounds familiar to you, and it should. Because if you go back to 1 Samuel chapter 15, it tells us how Saul was supposed to utterly annihilate the Amalekites, who their king was Agag. This is an example of the consequences of Saul not following instruction. Because these individuals are still around. And if he is following history, and it seems like he did because he found out he was Jewish, that there's kind of a reason why he's wanting not only to annihilate Mordecai, he's wanting to annihilate everybody. Because there'll be another Mordecai that comes along. So let's wipe him out. And we could probably wipe him out in this empire. And sometimes when it comes to this, we are willing to do whatever it takes. Don't forget about the children that love him. Don't forget about the wife that loves him. Don't forget about the friends who love him. Don't forget about the great things he has. He has taken all those for granted because he thinks he always has them and he always will have them. But he doesn't realize this one thing that's so insignificant and so small, and he's letting this build up more and more and more. It's going to get to a point that something's going to blow, and it's not going to be him. Because we'll find out he's not the one who's going to be frustrated at the end. It's going to be the king. And he's going to be upset because this guy has decided to take liberties that he has no idea what he is doing. And it's all because he's mad at one person. So, sometimes our desires blind our blessings. If you look at Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 10, it tells us he who loves money will never be satisfied with money. It's the individual will never be satisfied with anything. We always say to ourselves, if I have this one thing, if I have this, I'm content. If I have this home, I'm happy. If I have this car, I'm happy. If I have this job, I'm happy. If I have this, I'm happy. But we all find out, even when we obtain these things, there's always one more thing out there we want. And throughout our lives, we will always desire that one thing. Maybe it's one more day of health. Maybe it's one more year of health. Maybe it's a time to spend with my children. Maybe we always have some one thing to look forward to. And sometimes that one thing, as we see with Haman, will obsess us to where we forget about all the great things we have. I don't know about you, but on Thanksgiving Day, I wasn't cold. Maybe some of you were. You were out deer hunting. None of us is starving. All of us got here by some kind of vehicle. All of us are going to have something to eat afterwards. All of us, well, some of us, will spend our afternoon just taking it easy so we can get ready for tomorrow to go back to work. One thing I find interesting, I was talking about the game, and not the West Virginia game, I was talking about the Ohio State-Michigan game with Eric. And one thing I'll just never understand, it was on social media, this one boy said, he goes, this is the worst thing that ever happened in my life. Michigan beating Ohio State. Nothing else? If that's the worst thing that's happened in your life, you got a pretty good life. To be that obsessed over a ball game. No matter who wins, there'll be other games. But to make that kind of statement to say that this is the worst thing happened in your life, there's a lot of games I was not happy with the ending. But it doesn't compare with some of the horrible things I've dealt with in my life. And maybe you're the same way. Maybe you can sit back and say, yeah, there's some things that's happened in my life I don't ever want to happen again. But brethren, we're just like that. We sometimes think that these horrible things are happening, and we fail to realize someone's got a little bit worse than you. And somebody has it a little bit harder than you. I don't have 10 sons like Haman does. I don't have riches like Haman does. I don't have the luxury of being around a king and queen like Haman does. But the thing is, if I had those things, yeah, I'd be content. But here he has these things, and he's not. So my next point is that pride goes before destruction. The proverb writer reminds us in Proverbs chapter 16, verse 18, that this arrogance that some people have don't realize that it will consume to a point that it destroys everything they There is people out there that have great riches. There is people out there that have great things. And you'll find out some more times than not that those individuals are miserable. If you ever come to Parkersburg, you go through Vienna, especially if you're going towards my house, on the left, there's a beautiful mansion there with a fountain. And the guy that used to own it owned the concrete company. I can't remember the concrete company's name at the time. And he made some great money. And you would think because you drive along and you see this beautiful place that he's got it. He took his life because of the struggles with his wife. Just because we have these great things does not mean that good things happen in the end. One of the things I find interesting in Esther chapter 6, verse 13, is Zeresh, his wife, says something to him that maybe he doesn't realize at the time before he goes and sees Esther and Ahasuerus. In verse 13 of Esther chapter 6, Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him. And this is where he is called out from the king. And the king asked him, he goes, if I was going to give someone honor, how do I go about doing it? And thinking it was about him, he says, I would give him the king's robe, I would put him on the king's horse, and I would give him the king's crown and go through town. Will you go do that to Mordecai for me? He's upset. Because as he's preparing for his gallows, now he is celebrating him. And it gets worse after that. And she tells him, he goes, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. You're going to fail. You're making this too big of a deal. And now he has an opportunity to see the king and the queen. And this is where tragedy happens. One of the things that Ahasuerus does, he makes a decree. A couple chapters back, he makes a decree first. He says, if anybody, and we read there about anybody that was Jewish, that men and women and children would be killed at this particular time and will plunder everything that they have. And one of the things that the king asked Esther to do is revoke this. Stop it. And this is the weird thing. He says, I can't revoke this. Well, why not? You're the king. He says, well, I got something better to do instead. He goes to verse 11. It says, if anybody goes against Mordecai and his people, they can kill men, women, and children and take the plunder. That solves the problem, doesn't it? Let's solve the problem of violence with more violence. But sometimes this is where the foolishness comes into play. That's why you go back to Proverbs and you see where he tells them, don't do stupid things. And there you have to try to fix these stupid problems. Haman's family is killed. Those children that he loves, that he took very great pride in, those 10 sons, they were killed. And Esther makes it even worse. She says, I want them hung in the gallows. His friends are killed. Not just the ones in Susan, not only in that capital city where all of his friends are at, but anybody who was on his side was killed. Anyone who was against Mordecai was killed. 75,000 people. Because of one man had one issue with one person. It's tragic, the consequences of one man's anger and forgetting the great things that he has will do to him. This thing continues in infamy today. There's a thing called a Day of Purim, and you'll read about it in the book of Esther as well. And they still celebrate this today. They celebrate around March. And what they do is they take this opportunity to dress up, and they take the opportunity to give out gifts, and it's kind of like, forgive me, it's just supposed to be more of Halloween, how they do things. They commemorate and they do great things, and they eat and they drink and they give to the poor, and they take this opportunity to also read the book of Esther. And every time Haman's name is mentioned, they boo and hiss. It's like same thing when they read this scroll and they mention Haman's name. There's two things I want you to get out of this message today. It's this. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 31 tells us, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with malice. Don't let something consume you that bad. And also, in Psalms 103, it says, bless the Lord, O my soul, and do not let me forget all the benefits. We have benefits that we are receiving even now, today, as we take this opportunity to maybe remember him in baptism. Remember, it carries those two principles, the love for God and love for man. The love of God, that you're willing to follow him in commandment. The love for one another as we encourage and edify one another through this baptism. We have this opportunity to do that here today. Maybe someone here needs to repent of sin, and we have an opportunity now. If there's one here who needs to repent of sin, and look how we are willing to make a change for God, and how we can be encouraged and edified that we are in this together, and we can work on these things together. We also have an opportunity too, if we need to pray about something. On my way here, I usually stop at a gas station, and I get donut sticks and a chocolate milk before I make my way up here. There's this one guy that I always see at the store, and I asked him, I said, how you doing today? He says, not good. I said, what's going on? He said, my girlfriend, 36 years of age, passed away. And he's just not the same guy. Pray for him, because it seemed like everything was going on the right path for him right now. And now all of a sudden this happened. Sometimes those things are a struggle, and we understand they're a struggle, and maybe we need to be encouraged with one another and do it through prayer. We talk about how great it is to have these physical things that people are willing to help out with one another, but how great are the spiritual gifts that we have that we can help out one another as well. These things are available for all of us here. And if